And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program, doing my level best to help make sense out of nonsense, bringing you engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, day in and day out, in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Great to be with you today. Thanks for joining us, being a part of the program. By the way, I forgot to mention this yesterday. If you want to join into the festivities, you can do so. You can tweet at me at Sang Center. You see on the lower third there, it's Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. You can also log on to my website, jimmysengenberger.com. Go to the contact page and shoot me a message there. Remember, there's no A, there's no I, there's no U in Sengenberger. It's all E's all the time. Once you know that, Sengenberger is easy. So a few different ways to get in touch. Please, by the way, if you haven't done so, subscribe to the YouTube channel, Jimmy at the Crossroads, as well as to my Facebook page, Jimmy Sengenberger Media Personality, because both of those places are where you can go to watch the live stream whenever we broadcast, as well as catch videos after the fact. Plus, be sure to subscribe to our friends at the Washington Examiner on their YouTube channel, as well as following them on Facebook and on Twitter as well, at DC Examiner on Twitter. So great to be with you today. Good show. It's Wex Wednesday. That is to say, Washington Examiner Wednesday. We've got John Gage, breaking news reporter at the Examiner, joining us today to catch up on some of the big news stories or notable news stories, maybe some things you haven't seen or that haven't gotten too much attention. So looking forward to having John Gage from the Examiner on. Then we will be rejoined once again by Keith Nobles for the second time. He is a former intelligence contractor to the intel community for about 15 years, including the last decade of the Cold War. He's also the author of the novel Our Dogs Did Not Bark, a politically incorrect dystopian tale. And Keith's going to rejoin us in order to talk about the firing of or removal of Captain Crozier and then the resignation yesterday of Navy Secretary Thoms Modly for his comments about the captain. We'll get some expert analysis from Keith Nobles coming up in a little while. And then finally, last but not least, John Tamny will join us. He is editor at RealClearMarkets, as well as vice president at FreedomWorks, the author of a number of books, big-time free market guy. We're going to talk about what makes an economy tick, what drives an economy, and what's needed in order to get things back on track. But first, on Monday, I had my monologue. And I talked a little bit about the whole question of the length of the shutdown that we're seeing across the country in many places. And I discussed how those who believe in big government tend to be telling us we need to prepare for months on end of a shutdown. The governor of Virginia setting June 10th as his date for when he's hoping to reopen Virginia's economy. But others talking September. Still others talking a year and a half out. We'll play a clip in a moment of one individual on MSNBC who thinks exactly that. But I made the point on Monday that only those who really have faith in government's ability to provide for the people believe that it is okay and that we should move forward with months and months of an economic shutdown to contain the spread of this virus. Now, make no mistake, we need to address the virus. We need to take steps as a country and states across the union to address this crisis and to flatten the curve and slow the spread. But as we talked about on Monday, that doesn't mean that we should allow this thing to go into perpetuity. That is not justifiable, and as I said, it is not tenable. And yet we have individuals like Zeke Emanuel. Dr. Zeke Emanuel, this is cut one, is a medical contributor on MSNBC and also senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, which happens to be a very left-wing outlet, a leftist think tank. And at Center for American Progress, he's been an advocate for some interesting, shall we say, views when it comes to medicine and treatment and government's role and so forth. But when you hear him speak about the timeline, keep in mind that he's at a left-wing think tank that believes that government has the capacity, the ability, and the responsibility to provide for the needs of the American people. Let's watch.
We will not be able to return to normalcy until we find a vaccine or effective medications. I know that's dreadful news to hear. How are people supposed to find work if this goes on in some form for a year and a half? Is all that economic pain worth trying to stop COVID-19? The truth is, we have no choice. If we prematurely end that physical distancing and the other measures, keeping it at bay, deaths could skyrocket into the hundreds of thousands, if not a million. We cannot return to normal until there's a vaccine. Conferences, concerts, sporting events, religious services, dinner in a restaurant, none of that will resume until we find a vaccine, a treatment, or a cure. One thing I've learned as a cancer doctor is that it's wrong to paint an overly rosy picture in order to maintain a patient's hope. It's wrong because it fails. It's false. Biology and disease are formidable opponents that inevitably tell us the truth. We cannot relieve the oppression of this pandemic until we are realistic. We need to prepare ourselves for this to last 18 months or so and for the toll that it will take. We need to develop a long-term solution based on those facts. It has to account for what we are losing while this fight goes on. Things like schooling and income and contact with our friends and extended family. Lawrence, the crisis is not going to go away in a few weeks or after the 30-day plan comes to an end. Although COVID-19 is affecting us in different ways, we have to be up to it and fight together.
Prepare for this thing to last 18 months or so, to last a year and a half or so. I have to tell you, re-emphasizing my point, that the only people who can possibly believe that we can shut down an economy and a way of life in the United States of America and keep going for 18 months is somebody who truly has faith in government. And never more have I thought that these words in cut two of Ronald Reagan were more relevant than they are today.
I think you all know that I've always felt the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Not only is a Zeke Emanuel making the argument that government should be there to help us in order to allow this thing to last for so long. But it is the case that he's contending the government should do this, that we should shut things down. Let's go to cut 3. Ronald Reagan making a very notable point in the 1981 inaugural address.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. It is time to reawaken this industrial giant, to get government back within its means, and to lighten our punitive tax burden. And these will be our first priorities, and on these principles there will be no compromise.
In order for Reagan's words to be heeded now in this crisis, we need to get past this crisis situation. And that doesn't mean that we go 18 months. We cannot. We need to contain this thing. We need to slow the spread, do our level best, but get things open at the earliest opportunity. The government cannot and should not provide for the needs of the people for a year and a half and shut down our way of life through its force and its prescience. We do not have an all-knowing, all-powerful federal government with experts and elites like Zeke Emanuel able to control everything, able to make all of these decisions and micromanage our lives. That is unacceptable. We must not sit still for it. And thankfully, Donald Trump is president of the United States, and we have many sensible governors across the country that will not allow this ideology to be pursued. The notion of 18 months is absurd, and only somebody who truly and completely believes in the ability of the federal government to take care of people for such an extended period of time, somehow funded through magic, I think, and who has faith in the government and that it should do this sort of thing. Only that individual can believe in it. It is not realistic, and it's also not what America has stood for from the beginning. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. We're overdue for a break. John Gage up next from the Washington Examiner as we move forward here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Stay here.
Do you suffer from feelings of entitlement, self-righteousness, and arrogance? Fits of resentment, anger, and hypocrisy? Terror that the world is going to end, or even worse, that the world isn't going to end and that things are going to get better? A deep need to point fingers, deflect, or deny? Uncontrollable stress, frustration, or depression? Fear of recession, fear of no recession? Then you may have PTDS, or President Trump Derangement Syndrome. Fortunately, there's new Magatol, the proven cure for PTDS. Just one Magatol a day realigns your sensibilities by bypassing erratic brain signals to amplify the logic receptors. Talk to your Obamacare doctor today to see if Magatol is right for you. Recommended dose of reality is at least once daily. Warning snowflakes. Side effects of Magatol may include optimism, hope for the future, good feelings about your country, accepting economic prosperity, renewed faith in capitalism, and admitting that things aren't so bad under Trump. If you discover you're allergic to common sense, stop use immediately and contact your doctor. Relax. Breathe. It's Magatol, from the makers of Triggerol.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Hi, Tom. Gee, you look terrible.
I feel terrible. Achy, fevery, nauseous.
Ooh, that's too bad. You know, you ought to...
Chills, stuffiness, bloating.
Yeah, you know...
Scratchy, gassy, drippy.
I know! Say, Tom, you should try Wearaflu.
Wearaflu?
Wearaflu is the only medication that actually takes your flu symptoms and hides them at various places inside your body so that by the time your body finds them all, your flu is gone. In the meantime, you're back to work.
You were right, Ed. Wearaflu lets me ignore my flu symptoms and gets me back to work. Thanks.
Yeah, and thanks for coming in and infecting the rest of the office.
Come out wherever you are with Wearaflu. Take as directed.
Nathan Matoush, producer extraordinaire, working the Matoush magic today, as always. Welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program. So great to be with you on this Wednesday, April 8th. Boy, to me, time just seems to be flying right on by, but we've been keeping busy here on the program. I know so many people have been stuck at home most of the day in and day out because of the shutdowns that we're seeing. Big question a lot of people are asking is, how long will this last? And part of the answer comes from the data question. And that is, what does the science show us? Okay, how do you interpret that science? As I've said before here on the show, the science is only as good as those who interpret that science, and also those who then take that interpretation and craft public policy off of it. But the data is key. Where are things leveling off in the country in terms of the increase in the spread? Where around the globe are they leveling off? What are we seeing in China? In fact, in Wuhan, the coronavirus shutdown is over. They're bringing things back to life, but what are the numbers showing us? Also, some of the political stories and so forth. These are all different topics I want to get into today with our first guest. It is Washington Examiner Wednesday, and I am pleased to welcome to Jimmy at the Crossroads John Gage, who's a breaking news reporter at the Examiner, our partners here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. John, welcome to the show. Good to talk with you.
Good to talk to you. Thanks for having me on, Jimmy.
Thanks for coming on. We appreciate the time today. So, bring us up to speed, please. Let's start and jump right into it on how the coronavirus shutdown is being undone now in Wuhan, China. That's interesting because that was the birthplace of all of this.
Yeah, so yesterday our time, which would have been Wednesday in China, they lifted the lockdown in Wuhan, at least partially, so people could start moving around again. They had about 65,000 people leave the city on trains and planes just in a few hours after lifting the lockdown. Not all the restrictions are gone. They still have the school shut down, and they're doing things like temperature checks, and they have like a health app to see if people are healthy, to see how much movement these people can have and have to let them out of the region. But they're starting to sort of open up the region more there.
So what are we seeing from China? I mean, a lot of folks have been pointing out that we really can't trust the numbers that have been coming out of China, John, because they want to skew them. In fact, in the very beginning, they didn't even let people know across the globe that this was a serious pandemic in waiting or something to take seriously. So what are the Chinese saying has been their death toll and their number of infected, and what is the reason why people are doubting that?
So the official numbers for the Wuhan and sort of broader Hubei region, that whole region has about 60 million people there. And the claim from the Chinese government is that there's only been 3,000 deaths approximately in that whole area. Now, locals there and whistleblowers within that region have said it's probably, and these figures were near the end of last month, so I presume they're probably even higher, that the total is probably closer to 40,000 to 45, maybe even 50,000 deaths. And that's based on the fact that this region, how many they've been running the cremating people basically nonstop for like a month. And people have done just basic math on how long that would take, and a minimum of 40,000 people likely. There's also numbers done by how many urns they've given out, and it's well above the official tally that the Chinese government is giving. And you have to remember, I'll add another thing, is that China kicked out all American journalists. So even that, like, the best information we can get from whistleblowers, like, we're not even having like journalists in there to sort of figure out what the real thing is. We're having to rely on sort of just eyewitnesses there getting information to us any way they can.
John Gage with the Washington Examiner joining us. 1.4 million confirmed cases across the globe, more than 80,000 deaths worldwide. What are the numbers looking like here in the United States at this point?
So things actually have started to look a little bit better in the United States. I think the latest I saw is that we've sort of seen in the last few days a leveling off of new cases, where I think Friday was the peak, and now we're at Tuesday, and we're a little bit below of the peak of where we are. What you will see, though, and I think the emphasis will shift, is as you see a leveling off of cases, new cases, the increase not going up, you still will see an increase in death rate, because that will lay a couple of weeks behind when cases peak, because just, when you get the case, it takes a few weeks usually for someone to die. So we're probably at minimum, at least nationwide, probably at least 2 weeks away from the peak when it comes to, how many deaths there are per day. Right now we're at about 400,000 confirmed cases nationwide. And I expect that to continue growing for the near future.
And of course, that's confirmed cases. We haven't had a widespread testing capability to figure out, or antibody tests as well, to be able to ascertain who's already had this virus.
No, we haven't yet, and that's something they're working on. Another concern is, are there people who are being tested and have it, but the tests might not always be 100% efficient? I know some doctors in some places around the country estimate that the tests they have might only be 70% effective. So there could be about a third of cases of people who are going in with, a fever, and they're getting tested and it's coming back negative, but they still have the coronavirus, and it just doesn't show up on the test because it's sort of new and we don't have 100% effective testing right now.
Once again, John Gage joining us, breaking news reporter at the Washington Examiner. Let's talk about how this coronavirus impacted yesterday's primary in Wisconsin. Joe Biden successful there, it looks like, but the Supreme Court had a case presented, an argument that they should be able to postpone it in Wisconsin. That wasn't allowed. The Supreme Court said, no, you have to proceed. Yesterday, people showed up at polling booths, and they had, in many cases, their masks on as recommended by the Centers for Disease Control. But what did we see yesterday, John Gage, when it came to the Wisconsin primary, both from the political aspect of it, actually the victory and the voting, and then also from the Supreme Court and how that led people to go out to the polls, but of course wearing masks, keeping up social distancing rules, and so forth?
Yeah, what we saw a lot of yesterday is a lot of waiting in line. There was people waiting in line for hours. At a lot of polling stations, what they do is they put out cones, make sure people were staying 6 feet apart. As you mentioned, there's a lot of mask wearing at these places. I think there's a lot of people angry that they had to show up to the polls and couldn't mail in their ballots. But this wasn't we've only been going through this for a month, and I think we're still adapting what the best way to handle this, especially with polling and such. And I guess the immediate impact of this is Bernie Sanders dropping out about an hour ago from the presidential election.
So in terms of the Supreme Court, this was the U.S. Supreme Court. What was their reasoning for saying not to extend the voting?
The argument for not allowing what Wisconsin wanted to do basically is allow ballots that had been postmarked in the mail past on Tuesday to be counted. And the rationale was, well, you can't do that because that sort of defeats the purpose of having an election if you can vote after an election. So that was one of the aspects, as they threw out being able to vote, to mail in your ballot past the date, which had a lot of people frustrated because I think there's a lot of people late planning on doing mail-in votes. And then the Supreme Court also ruled that the governor was not allowed to be able to extend the deadline on voting and move the election.
Okay, yeah. And so yesterday, how did it turn out for Joe Biden? Was there any doubt that he was going to be victorious?
Well, I think at this point it was pretty clear what was going to happen with Joe Biden and that he had this thing pretty much locked up. I mean, it's pretty much been in the cards for the last 3-4 weeks. And, Bernie stuck it out, see if anything changed. But I think, especially with coronavirus coming along, it sort of sucked the oxygen out of this race to which, Biden already had the benefit of, he had all the momentum, but there really wasn't any oxygen or news coverage to sort of flip the narrative for Bernie Sanders. And I think that's what you saw here is that, it's over.
So I want to turn a little bit more to the political dynamics in play, because this was striking, John, when Jake Tapper, CNN host, he hosts State of the Union on Sundays, for example, he retweeted out George Conway. And I want to post the tweet that show up on the screen here for our viewers, the tweet that Jake Tapper put out with the retweet. Let's put it up. He said, well, first, George Conway, who, of course, is a noted Trump critic, to put it mildly, and the husband of senior advisor in the White House, Kellyanne Conway, George Conway had tweeted, "He's 100% insane," as in President Trump, "and nobody in the administration has the balls to tell him that." Jake Tapper retweeting it and saying, quote, "Noteworthy comment on folks in the administration from a Trump critic who knows a lot of them." And now he's getting heat. I thought most notably, Jonathan Turley, the noted law professor from George Washington University, said in a tweet, quote, "Tapper's retweeting that Trump is 100% insane only further undermines the media by reaffirming for many that the media is campaigning against Trump rather than covering him. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result." Strong words from Professor Turley. What about this political dynamic in the media from somebody who's supposed to be a more objective journalist on CNN?
Yeah, and then interestingly enough, later on, Tapper had, because a lot of people got mad at this, and they're like, "What's up with this? This does not seem like something a nonpartisan journalist should be retweeting." And he defended himself again and said, "Well, retweets are not necessarily an agreement." But I think, as a lot of people pointed out, that would Tapper have retweeted someone, if it was going the other way, say if some critic said, "Oh, Obama was born in Kenya," or something like that, is that something Tapper would retweet? Probably not. And the idea that it's newsworthy because it's George Conway, anyone who's on Twitter can tell you Conway is tweeting stuff like this 24/7. This is like an average Conway tweet. It's not newsworthy. As we like to say in the news business, if dog bites man, that's not a news story. And that seems to be sort of the dynamic here, is how is this newsworthy if Conway is always saying Trump's insane? And that's Tapper's defense as well. This guy's noteworthy saying it, but he says it all the time.
Yeah, well, I would say, John, that the one instance in where a dog biting a man would be newsworthy is if, say, a dog bit the president of the United States, or a dog bit the governor of a state, you know, and it was a pretty deep bite too. That would be newsworthy, but generally speaking, that's exactly right. Again, John Gage joining us. So I'm just curious your thoughts or the sense for how the political dynamics are playing out here, because, I mean, Joe Biden himself has been, I thought, pretty restrained in some of the harsh rhetoric. He's been critical. He's saying he would do things differently, but he hasn't been going after tooth and nail the president of the United States like some other Democrats have, or people in the media, say, retweeting George Conway saying 100% insane.
Yeah, I mean, part of the dynamic is I do think these daily press briefings are really getting under the media skin because, you know, they're kind of backed in the corner where, for better or worse, they pretty much have to air these things because they are, like, it is important for the public to hear this health information that's being aired every day by the president, Dr. Fauci, and these other health officials. And I think, you know, you see these combative moments during the briefings with the various reporters. I know the most recent one with Jonathan Karl and Trump calling him a third-rate reporter. And I think this is Trump has always gotten under the media skin, but I think in particular here, it's been ratcheted up because there's been even more contact with the media through these briefings, and you've seen more fights, and yet the media still, you know, sort of has to air these things, and you see the president's approval rating going up, and you also see the media's approval rating. If you look at the numbers, they have the lowest trustworthiness rating of any of the major institutions during the coronavirus pandemic, and it's lower than Donald Trump's. I think this all feeds into sort of the contention you have here, and sort of even these supposedly nonpartisan people like Jake Tapper, who are even sort of, you know, pushing the limits of what they can say.
You know, it's striking to me, John, how there was a lot of criticism being leveled at the administration for not holding press conferences. I mean, we haven't had a press secretary hold a press conference in months upon months in the country, but President Trump daily has been doing these press briefings. And then it's like the dog who caught the car, going back to dog analogies, because suddenly they're doing these press briefings and they're like, what the heck do we do now? And not just a press briefing, but the president of the United States, plus Dr. Fauci and these others. So it's quite entertaining to watch. But I want to go to Colorado, where I'm broadcasting from, because I'm always pleased when a national outlet picks up a Colorado story. And you did exactly that, John Gage, at the Washington Examiner. In a piece entitled, Colorado Man Handcuffed for Allegedly Violating Social Distancing Guidelines by Playing T-Ball with Family at a Park. In Cut 9, let's play a little bit of this report from local Fox 31 KDVR. Again, Cut 9, that has a little bit of this story and some of the video footage of what went down.
Brighton police are apparently arresting a dad for throwing a ball to his daughter.
It was a former city council member who could not believe what he was recording.
In a park of about, 30, 40 acres. But apparently that is not allowed by Brighton.
Well, if you don't give us your information, we're going to put you in handcuffs in front of your 6-year-old daughter.
Matt Mooney is the 33-year-old dad who assured his daughter they were doing nothing wrong when police approached and told them they were violating the state's social distancing guideline.
She's like, Daddy, I don't want you to get arrested. And at this point, I'm thinking, there's no way they're going to arrest me. There's no way. This is insane. And, so I'm telling her, I'm like, don't worry, Daddy's not going to get arrested. I've done nothing wrong. Don't worry about it. And then they arrest me.
The sign at Donaldson Park says...
That's good. That gives us enough of a snippet. So tell us a little bit more about this, because I'm been curious, too, on how different parts of the country have been enforcing the social distancing guidelines and so forth. I mean, this was at a park, and there's more to it, too, in terms of a sign that was posted at this Brighton park. Mm-hmm. He was with his 6-year-old daughter. I mean, talk about a scarring moment for a 6-year-old to see her dad arrested for 10 minutes taking into a police car. But what more do you have?
Well, yeah, it appears he wasn't even violating any of the orders. The park said it was closed except for groups under 4 people who were doing activities like biking, walking, etc., doing exercise. And it was him, his 6-year-old daughter, and his wife, and they were playing t-ball. And, you know, as Mooney points out, he's like, well, I kind of think it was the police that were violating the social distancing order because, you know, they came and, you know, got up in my face and handcuffed me and threw me in the back of a car. And he's like, I think that was a lot more danger to me getting the coronavirus than anything he was doing.
Yeah, I'm struck. Have you seen anything more around the country of incidents like this, or is this appearing to be something relatively rare?
I think you'll see more and more stories like this. I don't think this is the norm. I think there's a reason they let him go after 10 minutes because they realized they probably overshot a little bit, and the police department says they're doing an investigation. You know, there's going to be more cracking down and stuff, and I think you'll see more stories like this. I don't think this is the norm. If I were, you know, if I had a 6-year-old daughter and I wanted to play t-ball, unless I was maybe in New York City, I probably would feel okay going to the park as long as the park allowed, you know, exercise and such to go do that and not expect the police to arrest me. So I don't think people should feel overly frightened, but I think you will see a handful of these stories come out as the lockdowns continue.
Sure, and I just think that the idea that a parent should just keep their child in the house and not do anything with them to keep them active and whatnot is just rather silly. So, well, John Gage, great reporting for the Washington Examiner. Really appreciate you joining us here today on Jimmy at the Crossroads.
Thanks for having me on, Jimmy.
Thank you, sir. Once again, John Gage joining us today, breaking news reporter at the Washington Examiner, our partners here on this very program. Appreciate you being along for the ride as well. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, Captain Brett Crozier was removed from command of the U.S.S. Theodore Roosevelt, a very important carrier with nuclear on the ship. He was removed. Now Thoms Modly, Navy Secretary, has resigned from his post. What should we make of all this? We'll talk with former Intel contractor for about 15 years, Keith Nobles, as we continue here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Don't go anywhere.
Students, this is the electoral college, is it not? We're looking for some sort of college. Anyway, we're going to be asking them some very important questions. Come with me. Let's see, what are the first 3 words of the Declaration of Independence?
The first 3 words of the Declaration of Independence are... I don't know. I don't know.
He's correct. I don't know.
No clue.
I've no clue. He's close.
We the people.
We the people.
3 words of the Declaration of Independence.
We the people.
You are wrong. Unfortunately, that is the first 3 words of the Constitution. You were so close, though. It's the Constitution. That's we the people. It's in the beginning. Wrong book. You the man?
In the beginning, that was the Bible.
Oh, when in the... What are the rights guaranteed by the First Amendment?
I have them on my phone.
Oh, the right to sleep in, the right to litter indiscriminately, the right to keep one's room as messy as one likes, the right to wear one's pants so baggy that you. Oh no.
Skinny jeans, actually.
Skinny jeans, yeah. Right there, there's St. Gadgetons right there.
Freedom of speech, religion.
Assemble.
Right to assemble, yes.
The right to bear arms.
Oh, that's
no,
the
that's
second.
Right to bear arms.
Oh, that's not bear arms as in this. Just bear arms.
Second Amendment. So it's the First Amendment. What are the 5 points?
We can speak and we can assemble, right? No?
Freedom of speech, your first. Freedom of assembly.
Ooh, very good.
Right to assemble. Right to free speech.
Free speech.
Ooh.
Good.
Right to free speech.
Wait.
Right to vote. No.
Freedom of press, right?
Yes, very good.
And then hold on.
Let's see. What are we doing right here? We're
celebrating Liberty Day.
No.
No.
What?
Is it privacy? Something to do with privacy? That's the second, right?
We have freedom of speech, freedom of religion,
freedom of press.
Oh,
freedom of press.
All right, 3. So you got 2 more. Shoot.
Yes, freedom to freedom. Got everybody's signature.
Right to party.
Freedom of speech.
Religion, freedom to assemble.
Press.
Petition.
Indeed.
You got to fight for that right to partay. Look at that interesting hat. It looks like Walt Disney threw up.
Hi, everybody. What's up? How you doing? I love you.
And now, the further future adventures of Starship Winkler. In today's episode, the captain is making travel plans.
Sparks, open up a frequency to price expediosity line.
Yes, Captain.
Hello, and welcome to Price Expediosity Line. How can I help you?
Well, I'll need a room.
Are you traveling alone?
Yes.
Oh, that's a shame. Never found the right woman, huh?
Well, there was this... No, wait, just book me a bed.
King, queen, full, twin, Murphy, or bunk.
King. You never know.
Well, as long as you're convinced. All right, name your price.
Name my price?
That's how it works. Name your price.
$6?
$6 it is. Let's plug it in here. Bippity, boppity, boo, and... Sorry, you were outbid.
By how much?
Penny. Someone bid 6. Oh, 1.
Who?
Oh boy, I just booked a room for $6.01.
Well, will the captain ever make a good bed bid? Tune in next time when we hear...
Here's one for $602.
I'll take it.
$1,000.
No! Damn dramatic pauses.
On Starship Winkler.
Do you wear a toupee? Do you yell out, Spock? Do you put in pauses when you talk? Do you start real soft and then go real loud? Have you won 2 Emmys? Do you love a crowd?
Whatever makes you feel like a Shatner. Yeah, you got lots of macho and swagger. You had alien affairs. You sing bad but no one cares. You find low airline fares. If you like to work, got a handsome smirk. If you're Captain Kirk, whatever makes you feel like a...
Me. Phases on. Stunning. Whatever makes you feel like a shit.
Welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads. We just like to have fun. I mean, rather, there are some programs that have breaks and then they just give you a we'll be right back notice. That's what the image says. Just be right back. Maybe there'll be music in the background. No. Here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, we like to have our fun video breaks with a variety of different types of content. And I love those last two from my friends at Critical Mass with our announcer, Jimmy Viles, doing Kirk. And it's just too much fun. Welcome back to the show that makes sense out of nonsense day in and day out, bringing you engaging, intelligent talk, saying style. I am Jimmy Sengenberger, host of Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. So great to be with you. So a couple of days ago, we talked with Major General Paul Vallely, retired Army general, and he had some interesting thoughts, very insightful thoughts on the firing or removal, rather, of Brett Crozier, the captain of the U.S.S. Theodore Roosevelt, from his post as captain. Of course, we had seen over the weekend when the captain was removed and he left the ship, his crew cheering his name because they were all very enthusiastic about that. about the captain wanting to show their support. Well, he made a mistake. President Trump saying he made a mistake, but I hope his career isn't toast. That's the sentiment that Major General Vallely observed on Monday. That's what he thought when he was on the show and expressed his views. Now, Thoms Modly, the Navy Secretary, has resigned after being very harsh in criticism of the captain, blasting him very strongly. So let's talk about this and the decision to remove Crozier from his post, as well as the removal or resignation of the Navy Secretary, who I would think probably pushed into it by somebody, and then also a little bit about China with good friend of the show, Keith Nobles. He is author of the novel Our Dogs Did Not Bark, a politically incorrect dystopian tale, but for about 15 years he was a contractor to the U.S. intelligence community, and Keith Nobles rejoins us here on the show. Keith, welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads.
Hey, how are you, Jimmy?
I'm doing well, my friend. How are you? I understand you just got back from camping.
I did, just this morning.
Do you like getting away like that?
I do.
When the world's going all crazy, you get away from it all?
Yes, there's a long-standing human tradition of the closer you get to nature, the more real things get.
Yes.
And we, a lot of people are kind of have abstracted themselves away from reality a good deal here. So it's good to get back.
Fair enough.
To do.
Yeah, I know you go
Stay
camping
warm.
relatively regularly, so that's got to be nice being able to get away like that. Well, Keith, I want to jump right in. As I mentioned, Captain Crozier was removed from his post on the U.S.S. Theodore Roosevelt as captain. I think on Friday we had retired Major General Vallely on Monday to talk about that, and he said, look, Crozier made a mistake with national security implications. He needed to be removed, but hopefully it's not the end of his career because he's a long-standing good officer and should have some sort of a post. Let's start there. What did you make of that, especially as somebody who was a contractor to the intelligence community for about 15 years?
I would agree with that. I think that's true. He made a mistake. And for someone...
What was the mistake exactly, by the way?
The mistake he made was he had men on his ship who were sick from this virus, and he distributed that information to people who had no need to know that information. That was the basic mistake. How sick the United States military is or is not, or how sick people on a nuclear aircraft are or not, is highly classified information. We do not want our potential adversaries being able to determine how many soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines may be ill and incapacitated, and take that into any kind of account for military calculations. That's just classified information. And so seeing other people, or if he did not personally do it, his allowing that to happen, that was just some bad judgment. It just was. Let's talk about for a minute here why this matters, because some people may be thinking, well, his men were sick, he's trying to get them help, he was trying not to get spread the ship, and all that is undoubtedly true, and his efforts to mitigate that were the right thing to do. He just had a lapse in judgment here by letting people know that who had no business knowing that. So in intelligence, in military affairs, you do not want your adversaries or potential adversaries to be able to know what you're doing, know what your actual strengths and weaknesses are. That's very important. And everybody has finite resources. China, Russia, the United States, to discover what their adversaries or potential adversaries' actual disposition may be. And you want your adversaries and potential adversaries to have to expend resources in order to discover this information. So it's not that China or Russia may not have found out that men were sick on that ship. It's that you want them to have to expend resources to do that, and you want them to always have some doubt in their mind about how accurate the information is that they believe they have acquired. And so what he did in that respect was a gift to our adversaries. And that was the error of judgment.
Keith Nobles, after this happened, there was, I guess, a recording uncovered of the Navy Secretary Thoms Modly going a little far in his language choice to talk about how the captain was stupid and so forth. What did you make of that? Because I do agree that that was excessive. And the problem that I see more than anything with his language was that you already had a sensitive PR issue, public relations issue, with the removal of this captain, where the public was thinking it was because Trump was basically being spotlighted as not handling the ship with sailors on it, over 100 who've tested positive, I think about 150 or so who had tested positive by that point on the ship, and that it was basically an attempted cover-up by the Trump administration. And then you have Modly going ahead and saying these kinds of things, and you never know when things might be recorded. I don't remember how it was recorded, maybe you do, but there's a PR issue where the public doesn't understand what's really going on here, and I'm curious what you make of it all.
I think those comments were wholly inappropriate.
Absolutely.
They just were. And this goes back some distance now. So when Donald Trump became president, General Kelly joined his staff. General Mattis was Secretary of Defense. Two very, very experienced people in geopolitical and military matters. They left the administration after a couple of years. Trump has had a lot of difficulty filling his Pentagon and intelligence slots with people who remain for any period of time, and in some cases with people who can demonstrate the level of competency required. And so this is an ongoing problem. This has kind of turned into a revolving door in terms of people who are in charge of intelligence, people who are in charge of the various departments at the Pentagon. Trump should really figure out how to fix this. How does he get some people in there that are competent at this that he can work with? And that's really, I think, the heart of the problem here. Mosley said, yeah, it was just unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
It was just unprofessional.
Right. Well, again, we're talking with Keith Nobles, who was an intelligence contractor for about 15 years, including the last decade of the Cold War, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Let me shift gears here, because these issues are coming in the context of national security concerns about China. I mean, obviously, the United States is very concerned about how this began in Wuhan, China, and there's, of course, the claim, which is absolutely true, that the Chinese government didn't allow the public around the globe, or their people even, to be aware of what was going on here, that there was a situation to be concerned about with regards to this virus and a possible pandemic. Well, now we're seeing a little bit of a language change by President Trump, a little less harsh. I want to read the first paragraph of a Fox News article by James Carafano from the Heritage Foundation. He says, quote, "In Beijing, U.S. Ambassador to China, Terry Branstad, recently talked about U.S.-China cooperation in fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. Meanwhile, back in the good old USA, neither President Trump nor Vice President Pence is referring to the disease as the Wuhan virus or the Chinese virus in their daily updates to the American people. Something is afoot, folks, and private U.S. officials say they stopped reminding the world of where this mess originated once Beijing stopped its mendacious propaganda accusing the U.S. of bringing COVID-19 to Wuhan." Now, maybe they've stopped that a little bit, but I don't think the Chinese have given up their disinformation campaign to try to silence those who were talking about where it had started. But have you noticed this, and what do you make of it?
I think that the relationship with China is obviously changing, and there's a lot going on under the covers. It would be easy to surmise there's a lot going on under the covers that we don't see. Now, why that is and what that is, there's a lot of speculation about that. And part of that probably roots to how badly hurt has China really been by this virus? Economically, militarily, are they more severely wounded than maybe public information would indicate? And if that's the case, then the United States would absolutely be aware of that. I mean, that's why we have intelligence agencies to understand that, to acquire that information, to analyze that information. But that's kind of the suspicion here, is maybe China is more severely wounded than they've publicly let on, or anyone has publicly admitted yet.
Sorry, my mic was not on. How significant is this in your mind? This back and forth with the U.S. and China?
I don't know if it's any more significant than it's been the last 3 years. That the tone has kind of changed is meaningful. The tone changing is interesting.
But
it's hard for us to tell in a public position right now what this really means. But it's worth noting. It's worth paying attention to going forward, how the next twist and turn may go.
So, Keith, I want to play a cut here, though, because this is something that was notable. This is cut 6 of President Donald Trump yesterday talking about a China-centric view of the World Health Organization. So he's still bringing up China a little bit here. Take a listen.
They really called, I would say, every aspect of it wrong. Until
the funding freeze.
I'm not happy about it. Look, we fund it. Take a look. I mean, go through step by step. They said there's no big deal, there's no big problem, there's no nothing. And then ultimately, when I closed it down, they actually said that I made a mistake in closing it down, and it turned out to be right. But at the time, they did that. So we're just going to take a look at it. We fund it, and they seem to be. I said recently in social media, I said they seem to be very China-centric.
So that's President Trump
nice
saying China-centric, Keith Nobles. So he's not toning down everything. He's still talking a little bit about that. I mean, obviously that's a criticism of the World Health Organization and a very apt criticism of the WHO, which trusted China's word in January about no human-to-human transmission of this virus, which was patently false. And then, of course, we played this clip before, earlier this week and last week, about the World Health Organization's guy over there, Dr. Alward, in an interview with a Hong Kong media outlet, refusing to acknowledge Taiwan and talking about China, not wanting to answer a particular question, basically carrying the water for China. So President Trump giving criticism to the WHO, but I would think that you can't really separate that criticism too much from criticism of China, because if you're saying that WHO is China-centric, there's an implicit criticism with China that they're doing something wrong in their country.
Well, this is true. So the World Health Organization had a stellar reputation for a very long time, and that was primarily because of their efforts in the 1960s and 70s to eradicate smallpox, and they were very successful at that. And they really haven't dealt with much on that scale since, until this year. And obviously the World Health Organization is nowhere near the organization it was 40 years ago. And it's just become obvious. Their lack of efficacy in dealing with COVID-19 has become obvious. Now, are they in the pockets of China? Are they China-centric? Well, I don't know if that's true. You never want to confuse incompetency with evil. And what they've shown is a distinct lack of competency here in this matter in the last 4 months.
Keith Nobles, intelligence contractor for about 15 years, including the last decade of the Cold War. Check out his very fascinating novel, Our Dogs Did Not Bark, a politically incorrect dystopian tale. So great to check in with you today, as always. Thanks for taking the time, fresh from camping. But of course, I know you always keep abreast of the news, even when you're trying to get away from it all in nature. So we appreciate your insights this edition of the show.
All right, thank you, Jimmy.
Once again, Keith Noble's joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. We're going to take a break, and when we return, we'll be joined by John Tamny. He is Vice President of FreedomWorks, as well as the editor for RealClearMarkets, author of several books. We're going to talk about a little bit of economics from a perspective that we're not hearing very much. What makes an economy tick? What drives an economy? Is it consumerism? Is that what we need to just get money in the hands of people so that they can go spend it in this economy right now? Or is it investment in businesses' ability to go forward, hire people, and keep active in that way? Or to get active? I mean, what do we need to do as far as driving an economy forward? We'll talk about that. Peter Navarro and his thoughts on Peter at the White House and more as we continue here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Don't go anywhere. We've got much more coming up.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Crikey, that was the biggest bloody mosquito I've ever seen. Wait, coming in. Oh, good day, mate. You know, after a long day of kangarangling and croc roping, a man can really work up an appetite. Not to mention a whopper of a backache. I know a place, and that's why I like coming into the Back Out Steakhouse. The Back Out is the only place I know where you can sit down in a lumbar support Barca lounger and enjoy a big juicy bandicoot steak or a thick koala chop served by a licensed chiropractor. And as you partake of your meal, your server will provide you with a spinal manipulation, neck twist, the hip alignment, the full Matilda. One visit to the Back Out Steakhouse and your spirits will return like an Abbo's boomerang. So the next time your back goes on walkabout and you're coincidentally, simultaneously craving a slab of cooked meat, waltz on into the Back Out Steakhouse. You not only feel good down under, but all over. Back Out Steakhouse! Good stuff, eh, Skippy? Bloody boomerangs. Back Out Steakhouse!
Hey, this is Frankie.
Hey, and I'm Angelo. We're the owners of F&A Pizzeria. If you're looking for the best pizza in town, remember us, F&A.
Hey, we got the best crust.
F&A.
We got the best cheese.
F&A.
We got the best sauce.
F&A, man.
Put it all together, what do you got?
F&A.
Yeah, you got that right. F&A.
F&A Pizza on the corner of Hill Ya Avenue and Dam Straight Street.
All right, fans, let's welcome back to the final segment, Mr. Jimmy Sengenberger.
Welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads, rocking and rolling along in partnership with the Washington Examiner. So great to be with you today. As always, bringing you engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style. Thanks so much for joining us. Boy, how time flies. Thanks to John Gage from the Washington Examiner, as well as Keith Nobles, Intel contractor, former Intel contractor, about 15 years, for joining us here on today's show. What I want to do in our final segment on the program that is where politics and economics collide is delve a little bit into the nature of economics, what drives an economy, what really makes it tick. Is it the consumer or is it investment? And then also some of the policies that are going on, the role Peter Navarro is playing in the White House, trade, and more. Let's talk about it with somebody who always gives a no-holds-barred perspective. He is editor at RealClearMarkets, as well as vice president at FreedomWorks and the author of a number of books, including, most recently, They're Both Wrong, a policy guide for America's frustrated independent thinkers. John Tamny rejoins us on Jimmy at the Crossroads. John, my friend, welcome back.
Hey, Jimmy, thanks for having me.
So how are you and your family doing so far amidst all this since we last spoke a couple weeks ago?
Oh, there's frustration in being at home a lot, but how dare I complain? And I mean that sincerely when you think about what some people are going through, where they quite literally woke up one day and were told they couldn't come to work, that people literally have had their businesses taken from them, people just out of nowhere laid off. How dare I complain? And so I'm just doing the best I can. I'm writing every day, writing more than I ever have. As long as I continue to have a job, I'll work harder than ever.
I think that's so well put, that there are so many people who, unlike us, are not able to continue working. In fact, there's one analysis, I think it was Moody Analytics. I wasn't sure yesterday, but I think it was Moody's Analytics saying 29% of the American economy is shut down now because of government edicts. And yet, what I find so interesting are those who say how long this must last. We played a clip earlier, and I won't play the video, but Zeke Emanuel, who's a medical contributor at MSNBC and a senior fellow at the left-wing Center for American Progress, says Americans need to be prepared for 18 months more of this shutdown. And as I've been pointing out, only somebody who truly believes in and has faith in the government's ability to provide for the people and thinks it's the role of government to provide for the people can say such a thing. It's not just about the data and the science, but there's a political philosophy behind it and an economic philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, to respond to that is to give credence or respect to something that's just so absurd.
Well, I did it earlier, so don't blame me.
Yeah, no, I know. The idea that we could be shut down for that length of time, that you can do that without causing massive societal unrest that would lead to exponentially more deaths than any virus could ever bring on. It's interesting. What do they always say? People talk their book. And so Zeke Emanuel is a doctor. And so I think in a sixth sense, some from that field live for the kinds of things. It's their form of ambulance chasing. When something like this comes up, their profile rises. And so they want us to be in crisis forever because they'll be in the public eye forever. What a sick thing to say.
Yeah, I don't see how you can just say, oh, well, the government will provide for 18 months so Americans can stay at home and be apart from their families and their friends, let alone from work. Now, I understand that there are remedial steps that they're trying to take, mitigation, some of which I agree with, some of which I don't. We need to address it. But even if you believe we should go a couple more months with this, the idea that you should go 18 months, I don't know how you can think that.
Well, and it's got to be stressed. There's no such thing as government spending. I mean, let's be honest. There is political allocation of resources that were always first created in the private sector. If government spent, well, then it would be certainly true that Haiti would have high levels of government spending. No, governments can only spend insofar as the private sector creates the wealth first. And so that's very important to stress. Even the federal government of the U.S., backed by the most productive people on earth, couldn't last that long. Would ultimately not have the funds. What's that saying? Eventually, with socialism, you run out of other people's money. Eventually, they'd run out of money. We need to be free to get back to work.
Now let's talk about the nature of an economy. So I've been watching different programs on YouTube and elsewhere where you hear people say, well, what you really need to do is provide money into people's pockets so that they can go out and spend it, I guess, part of it. I mean, right now I understand providing some relief for those who are out of work because of government dictates. But the idea goes beyond that. It's that consumers will need to be provided money from the government for a while because the consumer is the basis for the American economy. This is something, John Tamny, that you and I have discussed many a time in many conversations on the radio and now here at Jimmy at the Crossroads. That there's a fundamental fallacy there, but most people say this is a consumer economy. Is that a fallacy? If so, why?
It's an utter fallacy. Consumption is a consequence of economic growth, always. If everyone's got endless consumptive needs, but they're only able to fulfill them insofar as they produce first. And so Americans are big consumers because they're big producers. If all we did was consume, we'd still live in caves. It's the savings that lead to the creation of computers and cars and tractors that make us exponentially more productive. It's the savings that turn dial-up internet into what they say will be amazing 5G and eventually 10G internet that's going to transform how we do things and create forms of work that we never imagined. It's always the savings and investment that power production that then leads to consumption. To look at consumption is to miss the point. We all, again, want to consume, but we need to produce first.
Now, the Trump administration, it appears, John Tamny, is floating the idea of reducing the capital gains tax, which I see some people are saying, well, no, you shouldn't do that. If you're going to do anything, you need to reduce individual tax rates or give them money or what have you. Don't cut the capital gains tax rate. But going to your point about the way in which investment plays such a critical role, the fundamental role in our economy, if we want to, especially getting out of this economic malaise, once we do allow the economy to reopen, when the government says, sure, go ahead and start doing your businesses again, you are going to need capital investment to drive all of this. You and I are both advocates of eliminating the capital gains tax, but talk to us about why that is a worthwhile conversation to have, reducing or eliminating the capital gains tax, as opposed to a potential alternative, which is let's just focus on, say, cutting the income taxes of middle class or lower income workers, even though I would favor reducing tax rates on everybody.
Yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, most taxation would be local in cities and states, since people could kind of choose their bliss. But of course, the capital gains rate should be zero. Why on earth would you penalize people for saving and investing when it's remembered that saving and investing are the drivers of all job creation, company creation, progress, productivity, all those things? My only frustration with this right now is, policy to me is a non sequitur. We don't have a capital gains tax rate problem right now. What we have as a problem is that the political class in all levels has imposed command and control on the economy. And so until you fix the first part, where you say it's no longer right and we are not going to allow politicians to limit our ability to work and produce, all the other stuff kind of misses the point. And to me, it's just a bunch of happy talk. Get to the point. People are not free to work and produce right now. Everything else is irrelevant.
John Tamny, though, and again, he's vice president at FreedomWorks and also editor at RealClearMarkets. When we look at the criticism of reducing the capital gains tax, though, and you're absolutely right for the short term, the immediate sphere, the problem is for the economy is that the government's saying you can't function. But once we get out of this, or even before this point, we were hearing people say, well, we shouldn't cut the capital gains tax rate because that means that billionaires will be able to benefit. Well, first of all, billionaires are the ones that make capital work, that enable the economies to function by providing investment to businesses. But also, Jack Dorsey, CEO of Twitter, saying he's giving $1 billion, almost a third of his wealth, to help efforts to provide relief for coronavirus. Bill Gates also putting money to work. You have these billionaires that are trying to do things in a humanitarian way as well as business investment. What does that tell you?
Well, a couple things. In my instance, if I could control things, I would have them reinvest all that wealth. That's the most effective way to do it. But you hit on something important. When people say, oh, yeah, capital gains tax cut would help the billionaires, the response should always be, yeah, of course. And what's your point? because that's what you ideally want to have happen. Simple truth is that $1 in Jeff Bezos's pocket is exponentially more valuable to economic progress and job and company creation than $1 in my pocket. If you put an extra $1 in my pocket, I've got bills to pay. I've got things that I need. The beauty of someone like Bezos is that he's so rich he can't possibly spend all of his wealth. So every extra $1 not taken from him, almost as a rule, is going to be invested. And investment, of course, is again the driver of economic progress. It's the driver of job and growth and all the things that we want. And so always, if you really want growth, the only growth is in reducing the tax burden on those with the most.
One thing I've been struck by, and you mentioned command and control before, John Tamny, is the Defense Production Act and the implementation of that. I mean, here we have the government literally micromanaging supply chains. I can't fathom that.
It's amazing, and it shows you how much the conversation has drifted even in our time. You and I think I can speak for the both of us, have never really drifted away from the importance of free markets and all these things, but people just accept the idea that a president should arrogate to himself wartime powers to command industry to produce the things that he wants. And I'm like, well, wait a second. I've got a supercomputer in my pocket that years ago would have cost millions of dollars. I've got a flat screen 4H 8K UK TV, whatever that is, that a couple of years ago would have cost $25,000 plus. Capitalism turns scarcity into abundance all the time. If there's a problem of not enough ventilators, you don't then need the government to involve itself. It seems like the government's a non sequitur. It's just a needless interloper. Let price signals work, and we'll soon enough have ventilators as they're needed.
Speaking of ventilators and also the freedom to engage in commerce, General Motors has been ordered to produce ventilators. And they sent a letter on Friday to the Trump administration saying, hey, we have an issue here, which is that we can't produce the ventilators at an affordable price because, guess what? There are tariffs on the component parts. Now, the Trump administration was arguing, Peter Navarro in particular, who you wrote an article talking about in Real Clear Markets, John Tamny, the Trump administration via Peter Navarro has said, well, wait a second, we don't have tariffs on ventilators. You can just go ahead and do it. Just bring them in. But they were saying, no, the component parts of the ventilators have tariffs. That's the government raising the price of a needed item.
Well, it's just a reminder that the only closed economy is the world economy. Anything that is produced in the United States or by U.S. companies is a consequence of global production. My favorite example along these lines is they talk about American cars. Well, so the most American car, most of them are in fact Japanese made, or the most American made cars. But anyway, the most American car is the Jeep Cherokee. Well, okay, but 30% of the inputs that go into making the Jeep Cherokee come from around the world. So once you put taxes on foreign goods, you're just raising the price of production here. Everything is a consequence of supply chains and producers and creative people around the world. You cannot slap a tariff on the Chinese without it hitting Americans just as hard.
And you would think that in the midst of a crisis, they would understand, hey, the component parts to these products we need and would be best and easily best to manufacture here in the United States shouldn't be taxed. But then again, there are a heck of a lot of things that still have tariffs on them coming in from China, put in place by the Trump administration that shouldn't be there.
Yeah, I mean, to answer your question, you'd think that they would have known this in advance, that, wow, you put tariffs on something in China, you're going to harm every single American. There's just no way that you can do this without spreading great harm. As I always point out, if you're a worker, you're an importer. Now, that could be from goods across the street, but it's almost invariably goods from around the world. And so when you put tariffs up, you're taxing work in the United States. You're taxing the reason that we work. We work in order to get things. Tariffs raise the cost of us getting things.
Let's play Cut 5. Speaking of China and trade, this is President Donald Trump yesterday last night on Sean Hannity's show about what's happening in terms of China and trade in his view.
So we just signed a great trade deal with China. They're supposed to be spending close to $250 billion. We never had a trade deal where they ripped us left and right for years and years and decades. And you have the World Trade Organization, you have World Health, and you have the World Trade. The World Trade Organization was a horror for us because China got in, and from the day they got in, they took advantage of world trade, and especially with the United States. And we never had a president that did anything about it, or an administration or anybody. We had no trade deal. You know, a lot of people think we had a bad deal with China. We had no deal with China. They just did whatever they wanted. You know, what I've done is we have a very strong deal. They're supposed to buy $250 billion with a B dollars worth of our product. That's phase one. Phase two will come. We're getting tariffs, 25% on $250 billion. We never had anything from China. Look, China's done a great job, but we've rebuilt China because we gave them so much money for so many decades. We poured money into China, and it's absolutely ridiculous what we did and that was world trade.
So that's President Trump last night, and I was just struck by how he's always focused on the amount of product that is being purchased from the United States by China, or supposed to be. And then also the benefits that come from the fact that we get tariff money going into the federal coffers from products that come into the United States from China. I'm sure you have a lot to say about that.
Oh, yeah, I miss Republicans. I like the Republicans who used to talk about why politicians shouldn't plan economic exchange at all, but those days are sadly gone. The first thing, anything that raises federal revenues is a bad thing. Politicians don't just look lovingly at the money. They devise new ways to spend it, and that spending grows and grows. So basically, you're giving Nancy Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy, Chuck Schumer, the Kentucky Mitch McConnell, you're giving them more power over the economy. But beyond that, it's got to be stressed that the Chinese haven't taken advantage of us on trade. They've just given us a raise every day. Every day they get up and go to work, Americans get a raise. Their dollars buy more and more. And that's got to be stressed that the Chinese aren't producing abundantly for the American market because they want to live impoverished lives. They're doing so because they want American goods and they want them desperately. And so you see that there are 4,200 Starbucks in China on the way to 7,000. You see that China is the second largest market for Nike, the second largest market for McDonald's. It's the second biggest box office for U.S. movie makers. It's the fifth largest market in the world. Or no, it's China. Apple sells 1/5 of its iPhones there. Boeing 1/4 of its planes. GM sells more cars in China than it does in North America. They haven't taken advantage of us. They've grown, and in growing, they've become a huge market for American companies.
John Tamny, final question. This is going to be a broad one. You wrote a piece for RealClearMarkets, where you're an editor, published yesterday, entitled "Layoffs Are Always Sad." Peter Navarro's would be an exception. Of course, he is the lead China hawk in the Trump administration, has really helped shape China's trade, or the China trade policy in the administration, and also is now one of the leaders of implementing the Defense Production Act. What's your beef with good old Professor Navarro?
Oh, I almost regret that piece, to be honest with you. And I mean this very honestly. Hitting at Peter Navarro is shooting fish in a barrel. It's so easy. Navarro wants he wants the government to basically control the creation of ventilators. He wants a national plan for that. Well, you and I know that if there's a need expressed in the marketplace, that capitalism will provide it one way or the other. Navarro also says that looking forward after this, we've got to reduce our reliance on China's supply chains, that we've got to make more things here, buy American, manufacture American. Oh, dear. What a call for the U.S. to move backwards. Let's never forget that the factory jobs are in China and actually moving rapidly out of China precisely because they pay so little. And so if, in fact, they were able to bring factory jobs back to the United States, no one would want them. And of course, if you could mandate higher wages for them, well, U.S. production wouldn't be very competitive, and certainly it'd be even less competitive if we couldn't rely on global cooperation to make all the things that we make. And so, Navarro's talking nonsense. If he ever got his way, which he, thank goodness, won't, the U.S. would be impoverished. But I really and truly almost feel guilty. That was too easy. I think our side needs to be more innovative about the things they write about, and to come after someone as miniature in thought as Peter Navarro. I'm embarrassed. I'm sorry I did that.
Well, at the same time, he's in a senior position in the White House, John. So sometimes, even if you might feel the way you do, you need to present a countervailing position on Peter Navarro, because let's be honest that the folks on the left will criticize Navarro, but for very different reasons from the limited government standpoint that you and I come from.
That's it. No, you're very right, and I think there are bigger things right now, and that's one of the columns I'd like to have back. I think the focus from our side should be all day, every day. Not that I'm the quarterback or I'm the dictator. We have a political class, Republican and Democrat at all levels, who have quite literally responded to a virus by saying we need to put tens of millions out of work and decree mass poverty to fight it. Can you believe this? Have we lost our minds? We have such bigger problems than some dopey administration figure talking about Buy American. Politicians at all levels are trying to limit our ability to work and produce. That's terrifying, and it has implications for the future. And I wish I hadn't wasted a day or anyone's time writing about someone so inconsequential.
Sure. John Tamny, never holding back a thought, editor, Real Clear Markets, vice president at FreedomWorks. Always a pleasure to talk with you, my friend. Be well to you and your family, and stay healthy.
Thanks, Jimmy. Have a great day. Great show.
Thank you. You as well. Again, John Tamny joining us from FreedomWorks, also Real Clear Markets. Always just enjoy conversation with John Tamny, because he never minces words. He'll always tell it exactly as he thinks, and he is very much a limited government guy, to be sure. By the way, speaking of the Defense Production Act, I have a very interesting headline from the Wall Street Journal. At FEMA, companies offer critical coronavirus supplies the government can't buy. In other words, there are certain limitations that FEMA has in being able to purchase certain items in certain ways that these companies need. For example, pay up front, or other things that the companies require, or restrictions on FEMA from who they can buy from. Isn't that something where you have government trying to micromanage supply chains and control all the different facets here with the Defense Production Act, but at the same time, while they might be taking supplies in the federal government from states or what have you, they're also seeing that federal programs like FEMA that are supposed to be providing support and aid across the country oftentimes are caught up in red tape restrictions that make it more difficult for them to even, or impossible for them, to buy product from those companies that will provide. More than 1,000 companies responded to the Federal Emergency Management Agency's call about 2 weeks ago to provide needed supplies to fight the coronavirus pandemic, according to a person familiar with the matter. As of early Monday, only 3 companies had supplies the agency could actually buy. What? Red tape. That's what we get from government. Constrictive policies, micromanagement, and then when they even try to do certain things, it's difficult or impossible for the government to take the steps that they're supposed to. That's government for you. And this, by the way, is the reason why Zeke Emanuel from MSNBC, contributor there, a medical doctor, guess who's done a lot with cancer. Good for him in that regard. But he's a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. This is why the philosophy of a Zeke Emanuel, that for 18 months we can just shut down the economy and look to the all-knowing, all-powerful federal government to provide for us, is nonsense. Because the government can't even do the things that it's trying to do well. And now we want it to last for 18 months? Spare me. That is it for us today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I am Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with our friends at the Washington Examiner. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you as always here on this show. We will be back tomorrow working up a good program here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, where we, day in and day out, bring you engaging, intelligent talk, sang style, and of course, do our level best to make sense out of nonsense. Thanks again to John Gage from the Washington Examiner, Keith Nobles, John Tamny for joining us today, and to our partners at the Washington Examiner, as well as Nathan Matoush, working the Matoush Magic as producer. Back tomorrow, as always, May God bless America.